So yesterday we discussed about the memory management. That means how, just as an overview, how operating system manages memory while it loads an application from hard disk to the RAM. And today we will discuss about the process management part. And as an introduction to process management, I also discussed that for every process means the applications that are running within the system. Okay, for every process, uh, there is a process control block that keeps every information about that particular process, like uh, who started the process, the particular user who has started the process in the case of multi-user operating system, when that process got started, at which address the process is currently being executed, and so on. Now, so what we have seen that whenever OS brings an application from hard disk to RAM, it becomes a process. What OS does is that OS creates a PCB for that. For the new process. Whatever OS needs to do with the process, it does only via the PCB, the process control block for that particular process. Now, in the case of memory management, I told you that uh, it brings the process, it brings the particular application into the hard disk, if you can remember, and then what it does is that it tells the CPU that the new process has been loaded at this particular address, start executing from that, right? And what OS and what processor does is that, it loads it into the corresponding, I think I discussed in the operating system or somewhere else. I think I have discussed it previously at some particular slide. I have to check it out where, but the fact is, what we have seen till now, when OS brings the process suppose in the RAM, this is where the particular, say, first instruction, the first frame, if you can remember our yesterday discussion, the first instruction has been brought at some particular address, say 0x1234. What it does is that it tells the CPU that a new application has arrived at the address 1234, start executing that. And CPU in the instruction pointer register, the instruction pointer register loads the, in fact, OS loads the new address in the instruction pointer register. So instruction pointer register is loaded with the first address, first instruction address of the incoming of the new process. Now, obviously, now suppose if I open up, say, certain file manager, something like that, I suddenly opened it. But obviously, when I opened it, the CPU was already executing something. What it will do with that? Or will it directly load it into the instruction pointer? The answer is no. The fact that happens, the real fact, is that OS executes multiple processes at a time, right? Multiple processes at a time. How does it do that? The fact is, though there are several algorithms to do that, there is a list of all processes. That means the list of all PCBs. Okay, there is a list of all PCBs. So maybe the list is something like that. Say there are 4 processes. Though obviously in reality, as I've shown you in the previous day as well, there are hundreds of processes running at a particular time, even you have not opened up any application. Right. So suppose there are 4 processes at a time. I'm just showing a prototypical version of the real applications. Say this is the PCB of the process 1, this is the PCB of the process 2, this is the PCB of the process 3, and this is the PCB of the process 4. I've shown this in this format because there are the various information about this particular process, like the user ID who has created, the link to the page table, and so on, has been stored here. Now this is a list. Okay, later on, those who are in IT or computer science, they will see the various data structures, and I think also in electronics as well, they will study the various data structures. That means you can consider that they are in the memory, in the kernel memory. Kernel memory means where the kernel is residing at the lower end of the memory. In the kernel memory, it keeps a list of PCBs which are currently running. In fact, it keeps a list of PCBs. हाँ बोलो.
Let's stop.
Huh?
You wrote keeps of. You missed list.
Okay. It keeps a list of. Okay, thank you. It keeps a list of all the PCBs. PCB means which is currently running. Now, OS at a particular, now there are several algorithms. Among them, I'm discuss one particular technique. OS chooses or OS selects one PCB among them. To execute. Okay. Now it executes for say 10 milliseconds or 10 nanoseconds, and then switches to next PCB. That means next process. And so on. It has a name. It is called round robin algorithm. Round robin CPU scheduling algorithm. That means among all the running processes currently in the system, maybe suppose CPU selects the one in the at the front of the list. Okay, the one at the front of the list. It will execute that for say 10 nanosecond. Then after 10 nanosecond, it will put it back at the end of the list again. Then it will select P2. It will execute that for 10 nanosecond. After 10 nanosecond, it will put P2 at the end of the list again. It will then execute P3, and after P3, P4, then after 40 nanosecond, the chance for P1 will come again. Now, the fact is, this 10 nanosecond, this one here, it varies from OS to OS. Okay? It varies from OS to OS. Some OS works with 10 nanoseconds, some operating system works with 100 nanoseconds. But the fact is, our human brain cannot detect anything, cannot detect the difference between two events if that occurs within 10 milliseconds. That means suppose event A has occurred, then within 10 milliseconds event B occurs. It is a limitation of human brain. We will not be able to detect any time gap between A and B. So by the time I'm speaking, maybe this OneNote application has lost the CPU some thousands of numbers of time, and will not be able to detect it. That means if we look into the ps-cf command again, you can consider that these processes, these list of processes are being executed in sequence. That means maybe the first process, in fact this init process executes only once, but it stays in the RAM. I'm not going into the details of the init process. In fact, that is the parent process always of all the processes. The rest of the processes, they are in fact OS processes, the processes that is internal to the operating system. Again, let me try to keep this simple. So what happens is that at after every 10 nanosecond or 100 nanosecond, depending upon the operating system, it switches from one process to the next process. Then after 100 nanosecond, it goes to the next process again. Generally, it is kept 10 nanosecond. Now you may think, what does it execute for a particular application in 10 nanosecond? Consider something like this. Today's processors, say frequency is say 3.7 gigahertz for just 3.0 gigahertz. Let me consider 3.7 gigahertz is I think of i7 as far as I can remember. Okay, so 3 gigahertz or something like that, they are very common, at least 3 gigahertz. Now, though I cannot be certain about the gigahertz of i7. It can be 3.4 or 2.7 or something like that. I cannot say that with absolute certainty, but somewhere around 3 gigahertz. Now, with 3 gigahertz frequency, that means there is 3 into 1024. This gives you megahertz into 1024 into 1024.
Sir, it's not byte, it's hertz.
Yes. Thank you. In fact, always working with bytes, it has given me thanks. 1000 into 1000 into 1000. This many hertz is this is a frequency. So the clock pulse that is getting generated at 3 into 10 cube into 10 cube into 10 cube So 1 by 3 into 10 to the power minus 9 second, and that means 1/3 nanosecond, right? So after each 1/3 nanosecond, you are getting new clock pulses.
You mean, sir, the PCB is changed?
No. So you can think about this, that within 10 nanosecond, how many instructions can be executed? Even if I consider that on an average, each instruction takes 3 clock pulses, right? So you get almost 10 instructions executed before it gets to the next process. So consider something like this. On an average, at least 10 instructions get executed. Right? That is for 10 nanosecond. Now, if I do it, say, for 100 nanosecond switch time, that means you will get almost 100 instructions will be executed. So almost 10 or 100 instructions get executed before switching to next process.
सर
हाँ,
बट उसके लिए हमें उसको इंस्ट्रक्शन देने भी तो पड़ेंगे ना?
हाँ, obviously every application is an instruction, right? Let me tell about this. Suppose,
सर,
हाँ,
आई मीन आपने कहा कि अभी 10 नैनो सेकेंड्स में 10 या फिर 100 इंस्ट्रक्शन वो ले लेता है, लेकिन सर हमने उसको अगर कुछ इंस्ट्रक्शन दिए ही ना हो तो बस वो प्रोसेस चलता रहेगा अपने आप ही?
मतलब every process is an instruction, is a sequence of instruction. See, let me just clarify and tell me where you are confused. Suppose this is the P1 process. Okay, there are multiples of instructions that is executing here. Some millions of instructions may be executing for P1. Then suppose it is P2 process running here. Then suppose it is P3 process running here. Okay, now suppose 100 instructions got executed for P1. Okay, then it got switched. 100 instructions of P2 got executed. Then it got switched again. 100 instructions of P3 got executed, and so on. Then it came back to P1. Then from that starting point up to where it has executed already, 100 more instructions will be executed. After executing, say, 100 more instructions, 100 more instructions of P2 will be executed again. Is it clear whatever I'm saying?
It is clear, sir, but my question is again, right now you are on OneNote and you open some another application, then you haven't, do you given any instruction or it will just be there? I mean, okay, so please.
Okay, understood your question. Suppose if I have opened up this file manager. Okay, now think about this. Even though I'm not opening any file or anything else, this is executing. If it would not execute, if my file manager would not execute, it would simply close. Now you may ask, if I'm not doing anything, what is happening on this file manager?
Yes, sir.
The fact is, it's a GUI, graphical user interface, right? At least it has to send a particular amount of information to the monitor at every second. I'll go to the details when I'll discuss about the device driver, but this GUI has to send at every instant. Say you have 60 Hz refresh rate monitor. You have heard about the monitor's refresh rate. What does it mean by refresh rate of a monitor? Refresh rate of a monitor means on the monitor eventually, and on the monitor every information that we are seeing in the GUI, that's a pixel information. Okay, so at every point there is a pixel. Now how many pixels you have along the width and along the height? That's say 1024 into 768 or 1080p. What you hear about this 1920 into 1080p resolution? That is the if there is a 1080p monitor, then there are 1920 pixels around the width, 1080 pixels around the height, along the height. And if the refresh rate is 60 Hz, that means in every second 60 times this monitor is being refreshed. That means what? Let me discuss in a separate page. Say it is monitor. In fact, there is a video RAM. There is a special part in memory that is called video RAM. Though today's systems do not need this video RAM, because today's processors and say dedicated graphics card you have, it also has its own RAM. Maybe you have heard about the 2 GB graphics card or 4 GB graphics card. What is this GB? That is the amount of RAM that is in that particular graphics card. But what does it go into that particular graphics card? Okay, see, graphics card, whether it is dedicated or integrated. Integrated means, in fact, today's processors comes with integrated graphics card, right? Has its own RAM to keep the to store the contents on the monitor. Now, if it is a 60 Hz refresh monitor, that means at each second that the monitor brings pixel information from video RAM, whether it is integrated or a dedicated graphics card, 60 times, and shows that on monitor. And even if it refresh 60 times per second, if you calculate this, it is even less than 10 millisecond. Till it is less than 10 millisecond. So our eye cannot detect between two refreshes on the monitor. We see that as a continuous information, that it seems that the monitor is never changing. But behind this, whenever I drew a new line, why do you see it instantly? Because whenever I drew something, it got reflected into the video RAM. And as soon as it got reflected into the video RAM, whatever new information that is on the monitor, that is to be shown on the monitor, in the next refresh, that will be shown on the monitor. Is it clear whatever I said till now?
Yes, sir, clear.
Okay. Now, to keep this application open, operating system detects that what is the currently in front of the currently opened application in front of the user, that is file manager, right?
Yes.
And every second 60 times, my monitor is 60 Hz refresh rate monitor, every second 60 times it is sending that information to the monitor. So it is doing something. Even though you are not doing anything with this file manager, it is doing something in the background always, right? And at every time before sending that information to the monitor, it is every time calculating, is there any new file, is there any new directory that has been created? Because if I create a new file here, that got reflected immediately, right? Because whenever I created new file here, the GUI got the information that there is the file manager GUI got the information that there is a new file at the current location. Eventually, see, the GUI is just nothing but a front end of uh, the command prompt or the terminal, right? So to show information on the file manager, on the front end of the file manager, eventually it invokes the ls command, right? It invokes ls command, and whatever it sees, the directories, the files, it shows using particular fonts, using particular icons on your GUI, right? Before sending the information to the monitor, every time it is checking whether there is a new file or directory has been created by the user, right? If that would not be, this test.c would not be reflected immediately I created on your GUI. So it is working at every instant. It is not stopping. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Now, okay, so some of you is unmuted. If you have nothing to ask, kindly mute yourself. Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Bolo.
Sir, can you explain that modes again, sir? That kernel mode and what is switching?
Okay, that's what in fact I'm discussing about. User mode, kernel mode, and the context switching. Okay.
Okay, sir. Sir, also explain what is switching, sir.
Yes, context switching. That's context switching. That's what I'm going to discuss it now.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Now, in fact, that is the exact thing that I'm going to discuss as my next topic, context switching. OS, when switches from one process to next, it saves all informations suppose it switches from process P1 to process P2. It saves all information of P1. That means what? like what new frames has been brought in, that will be saved in the page table, up to which instruction that has been executed. Maybe the first 100 instruction has been executed. So 101th instruction will be the next one when it will come back to P1, right? The address of that instruction should be saved here. Right? These two will not change. These two will is there for as a metadata for the, that means the always fixed information about the process. Otherwise, all other information, if it has already applied for some, already requested for some new file, but it got switched even before that file got opened. So obviously that request will be stored here, right? So all informations along with all register information, contents of all registers. That's very important because though I do not want to go into the details, all the applications, all the instructions, they utilize the general purpose registers very frequently. Even though you write code in C or C++, Java or anything, any compiled language, Java is first. Eventually, in the end, somewhere the assembly instructions are executed. Now, for every instruction or for every application, those registers get used heavily, right? So suppose some application, say P1 application had some content in, say, register RAX, say 0x1 2 3 4 A B C D. It is a 64-bit register, so there will be 8 more hexadecimal digits. Now it is going to be switched. This process is going to be switched. P2 is about to come. P2 is about to arrive for the process, arrive for the CPU. But P2, the last time when it left, P2 had some different content in RAX register. So obviously that should be loaded so that neither user nor the process P2 itself has any ability to understand that P2 got switched somewhere in between. Okay, exactly the state where the machine was when it switched from P2 to P1, exactly at that state machine will be when it will switch back to P2 again, right? And so eventually it will come back from P2 to P1 again, and so this P1, the content of the registers for the P1 process should also be saved, and that gets saved in the PCB itself for that particular process. So contents of all registers and so on. So because of this content PCB, it saves all information of P1 means in its PCB. And loads all information of P2 and it takes the state, it takes the system to a state in which it exactly was when P2 left. So when P2 left, the system, the state the system was in. When P2 will come back in, the system will, the OS will load all the informations in exactly the similar order, in the similar manner. So the P2 does not get a feel that that something has been changed in between. Is it clear? This fact is called context switching. Switching from one process to another process smoothly.
सर
हाँ
सर फर्स्टली जब इसने P1 से P2 में इसने शिफ्ट किया तो उसने P1 की इंफॉर्मेशन को सेव कर दिया।
P1 की इंफॉर्मेशन अपने पीसीबी में स्टोर कर लिया।
यस सर। अब फिर उसने वापस P2 से P1 आया और फिर अगेन वो P1 से P2 जाएगा, तो जो पहले वाली इंफॉर्मेशन सेव थी वो डिलीट कर देगा या फिर
वहां पर ही ओवरराइट हो जाएगा रजिस्टर कंटेंट्स पे।
ओके सर।
क्योंकि सी सपोज P1 में था, देन P2 में गया, देन फिर से P1 में आया, देन P2 में गया। Okay. Now, when it will come back to P1, it does not need this information. Rather, it needs this information, right? It used this information and continued from that state. Now, when it will leave the system again, there is no necessary to store this one, isn't it? It is a continuous process. It will next time when it will come back, it will use just the previous process, the previous state. Okay.
Okay.
Now, that is context switching. Now, in fact, I'll discuss about the system call and user mode and kernel mode a bit later. Before that, let me discuss a few more things. Okay. So, when OS brings the new application, before that, let me write it here, that there is a list of all processes that OS keeps. This list is called ready queue. Ready queue. In fact, there is a queue because processes always end up always come back at the end, and process is always taken from the first. Okay, you'll understand what queue is when you study about the data structure. So when OS brings the new application, it does not give the address immediately to the instruction pointer. Okay, rather it puts it at the end of ready queue. This is the updated information you keep. The one for the initially, before discussing all these thing, I told that the instruction is given to the instruction pointer, but that's not exact. Okay, rather it in fact puts the PCB at the end of ready queue. Okay, and does not disturb the current learning process. Okay, any query regarding, I'll keep the discussion of process management up to this, though there are several further many interesting concepts of this process management and memory management are there in the study of operating system, but I'll have to keep it limited for this course. Otherwise, this discussion will be a completely operating system course rather than the C programming course. So any of you? हाँ बोलो।
सर जैसे हमने बहुत सारी एप्लीकेशंस खोल दी है तो उसमें बहुत सारे पीसीबीज आ जाएंगे, एक रेडी क्यू बन जाएगा।
हाँ,
बट सर अगर मैंने बस अपना पीसी अभी स्टार्ट ही किया है तो उसमें कोई रेडी क्यू होगा या फिर जस्ट कोई एक प्रोसेस है जो बार बार रिपीट होता रहेगा? देखो,
whenever the kernel will load ना, कर्नल जब भी लोड हो जाएगा तुम्हारे सिस्टम की मेमोरी में, एक रेडी क्यू वो इनिशियलाइज कर देगा। ओके, एंड the name of the process I told about this init process, that is always the first process that helps to boot the system. Okay, after the system boots up, this init process loads up all the other processes like your GUI, the login screen, all the background processes, right? That means in fact, okay, if you have In fact, in process, one process can fork other processes. That means suppose you have a process P1, it can create from this P1 two further process can get created, P2 and P3. Okay. Now from P2, maybe even further process can get generated. It is not that it will be a binary tree. From P2, further process can get created and so on. So it creates almost a tree of processes in the system. And these processes are called the child process of P1. Okay. When system boots, init process is the first process. Don't worry, this will not be in your syllabus. Init process is the first process. All the process that you see, that you will see when the system boots up, like loading up the GUI, starting the network manager, and all the things in the system that starts, they all get started from the init process. Now, so whenever the kernel boots up, it puts the ready queue. It starts the it puts the init process in that ready queue automatically. That will always happen. Then, as more and more process it starts, like see it started the network manager, the process that will manage the network of your operating system, that will be put into the ready queue. The process that is maintaining the GUI of your system, that will be put into the ready queue. So before in fact you log in, before even the login prompt appears in front of you, there are hundreds of processes already in the ready queue. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
But they are kernel processes. The processes started by the kernel are called kernel processes. And similarly, the processes started by user, such as I have started this OneNote process, such as I have started the Teams process, right? And as you can see, there are multiples of Teams process. Why? Because one Teams process got started, the rest are its children. Maybe two of them are children of the first starting Teams process that started the GUI of Teams. The rest are the children of the new processes further, and so on. Whatever it is, they are the descendant of the first Teams process that got started. So that's why you're seeing so many Teams processes running here, right? But eventually, all of them are doing different jobs by forking different processes. And all the Teams processes, as you can see, that it got the information from PCB who started the process. That's my name as the user. So that's the user process. So the process that started by the user are the user process. Okay. Any query regarding this process management up to what I have discussed now?
Yes, sir. Sir, since you are talking about user modes and context switching, sir, context switching can only occur in kernel mode, no, sir?
Yes, context switching will occur only in kernel mode. I have only discussed about the kernel process and user process. I have not discussed about user mode and kernel mode.
Yes, sir.
If you are asking it, let me discuss this.
Yes.
See. Though I was thinking about to put it up for later discussion. See, OS works in two modes. In generally there are three modes, but for easy discussion, I am discussing about the two modes. One is the user mode, where user processes run. Okay, and another is the kernel mode, where kernel processes execute, or kernel processes run. In fact, the processor itself, the CPU itself, knows in which mode it is running. There is a particular bit in a register, special register, which determines in which mode it is running. And there are three modes: user mode, kernel mode, and another mode that is extremely advanced topic of operating system, not even taught in BTech operating system course. That is, in that mode, VirtualBox, the virtual machines run. Okay, that is between user mode and kernel mode, but I'm not going into that level of details. For easiness, I'm discussing only about the user mode and kernel mode. So OS works in two modes. See, when OS starts, all the kernel, it is in kernel mode. Okay, it starts everything, all the processes that I have discussed, forks them, does all the necessary jobs, and creates the environment for user. Creates the environment for users, and then enters user mode. In user mode, it waits for user operations. It waits for user operations. Now, whenever we start interacting with the operating system, it makes extremely frequent switch between user mode and kernel mode. Why? Everything you are doing, such as for say accessing any IO device, uh, eventually, suppose I'm moving the mouse. Why do you think it is moving on the monitor? Because when I'm moving the mouse, I think I discussed about interrupt previous day. It is sending an interrupt to the CPU that that an event is coming from the mouse, that an event is coming from the touchpad. Okay, the CPU immediately informs OS that an interrupt has occurred, do something, right? What OS does is that it makes an immediate context. It stops whatever it was running. Okay, so it makes a context switch, and it invokes a corresponding function. That function, OS knows that if this particular interrupt occurs, I have to call that particular function. That function is invoked. Okay, maybe in that function it is written that take the take the X and Y axis of the mouse pointer. Okay. CPU has already informed that in which direction user is moving the finger, the corresponding gesture, right? OS takes the gesture, takes the current XY axis of the pointer and moves that accordingly. Now let me tell you this step by step. There are much more deeper things happening here. OS is one of the most complex software anyone can write. Now, when one accesses an I/O device, every I/O device sends. In fact, it's grammatically wrong. That particular I/O device sends an interrupt to the CPU. There is a special interrupt pin. Okay. That means one particular line dedicated for the interrupts. Now, that is coming from every device. On your motherboard, if you see, every device has a port. Every device that you'll see, every device has a port. The OS is communicating via that port with that particular device. Okay. Now this sends an interrupt to the CPU. CPU sends, in fact, CPU informs OS about the interrupt, about the details of the interrupt. Okay, that means which device has caused the interrupt. Every device has its own ID. Okay, in fact, if you invoked, let me clear this up first. If you invoke lspci command on Linux terminal, you will see that all the PCI devices that are connected to this system. Okay, in fact, the audio device, the memory controller, that means the memory. I have an NVMe SSD here, that corresponding on which PCI port it has been, it is there, its corresponding ID. Okay, so everything is here. CPU knows everything, and operating system is given all the information. Now, CPU informs the OS about the complete details of the interrupt. What OS does, OS has an interrupt controller. Rather than interrupt handler, interrupt controller, much proper term is interrupt handler. OS is an interrupt handler for every interrupt. And the OS writers write these interrupt handler functions very carefully. Okay. What OS does now? As soon as the particular interrupt has occurred, OS switches to kernel mode. Switches to kernel mode, handles the interrupt, now see, interrupt handler itself is a process. Okay, so context switching happens here. Whatever user process user was running here, and it is a highly privileged, that interrupt handler is a highly privileged process. So whatever it was doing here, Does not matter whether the corresponding 10 nanosecond or 100 nanosecond time duration is up, it will switch immediately. Okay, I'm not going into the details because it will switch immediately and it will handle the current interrupt that has occurred. It will handle that and
Sir?
then bolo.
Sir, for passing the instruction from user mode to kernel mode, any software will be there, sir?
There is a special functions that are called system calls. I'll talk about them. Don't worry.
Okay.
So handles the interrupt and then we'll come back to user mode again. And we'll continue where it stopped with the stopped process or the next process and on the ready queue. It will continue from that point onwards. Is it clear till now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And another time the switching happens. See, this switching happens without any programming. That means the application programmer is not controlling this. It has been written in OS. Whenever someone will press some keyboard or press something on the mouse, it will happen. Whereas application programmers can request for IO operations. Okay, as for example, can request for IO operations. As for example, let me write a small code. The simplest file, reading something, say test.c. Okay. Many of you already know this program. And I'm not going to do anything with this variable, just it is just an example, nothing more than that. Oh, sorry. Now see, it's waiting because my application has requested that it wants to read something. Okay, now if I give 12, it will stop. It will do its work. Now that means it is requesting for an IO device operation. It is waiting for some IO operation, right? The same thing happens even if I provide a printf here as well. Why did I say it was also waiting for an IO operation? Because it requested in fact, it has a request for monitor now. In the scanf, it was a request for keyboard. In the printf, it has now a request for monitor. That it has to refresh the video RAM with this new information, with the new output that it wants to show. And if your application is some GUI, then obviously, in any case, it has request for monitor. So either it will have the request for some input operation, input device, or it will have some request for some IO device. Output device. So application programs can request for IO operations, but IO devices are controlled by OS. Okay. In fact, any hardware related request like accessing some input device, accessing some output device, or even later on you'll see that when I'll tell you about dynamic memory, that means programs can request for some particular amount of memory dynamically when executing. Okay, I'll discuss about that later. Even when requesting for even on such requests, those requests have to be made to operating system, right? So any hardware related requests should go via operating system. I think I have also discussed it previously as well. Okay. Now, application programs make this request via something that is called system calls. So, in fact, system calls you can think is something like this. Operating system is doing all the complex stuffs sitting out of the hardware. Okay. Now, if you and this is controlling every hardware you have on your system. Now, it has made like of a black box. It has made some buttons available that you have to only control those buttons to make the request. That maybe you see, like an example for this. If you want to play a radio, right? You do not need to how radio is playing that particular music. If you want to increase the volume, simply rotate the volume button, right, the volume knob, and so on. So operating system makes these system calls exactly like this. It is doing huge amount of jobs sitting out of the hardware, but to make everything easy for the application programmers, it has made a number of system calls available for the application programs. So as an example, on Linux, if we need to show some info on monitor, that means, or maybe if we need to write some info on monitor, there is the write system call. Okay, if you want to read something, to read information, it is read system call. Now the fact is, you may ask, where is this write and read? What you are seeing is printf and scanf. The fact is, printf internally is invoking this write system call, and scanf internally is invoking the read system call. Now another question might occur, so why this printf and scanf, and why are not we using the read and write system calls directly? You can. There is a header file for that as well in the Linux, but printf and scanf are used mostly because that is a wrapper above the read and write system call, which makes it OS independent. That means what? for maybe for writing on the monitor or for reading something from the keyboard, the name of the system calls or their functionalities are entirely different on the Windows. I do not know about them, so I cannot say what are their names on Windows, but there is a high probability that they are different on the Windows. So you can think like this: the C compiler running on Linux is invoking this read and write system call internally. The C compiler running on Windows is invoking those corresponding system calls internally. Okay. Now, whenever OS gets a syscall request, this is a shorthand for system call. It is also, this is a common terminology as well. Gets a syscall request, it switches to kernel mode. Okay, it switches to kernel mode, puts the process in waiting for the IO device, that means whatever the process that is currently running, it will have to wait for the corresponding IO device. Every IO device also has its own waiting queue. But again, let me try to keep this simple. Puts the process in waiting mode for the particular IO device. Whenever the IO is done, now see, after putting it on the IO device, and now it depends upon the particular IO device. As for example, if there is a keyboard, it will stay in the waiting mode, right? And OS will go back to the user mode and will continue as it was, right? Otherwise, if it would wait, if OS would also wait with your currently running process for the keyboard, you would not see other applications running parallelly. What does it do? It goes to the kernel mode, puts, if it is a scanf or read system call, it puts your process in the waiting mode for the keyboard, comes back to its other, and goes back to other processes, right? And when the process is done with the IO device, it puts the process back at the ready queue. Okay. Now, this operation is putting the process back. Whatever kernel is doing something in itself, that is happening in the kernel mode. So consider something like this. Suppose, let me give you two examples. Suppose your process is waiting for the keyboard. Okay, the application started to run. It made an application for user input. It made a request for the user input. OS will take the process, detach it from the ready queue, goes back into the kernel mode. Okay, puts the process on the waiting queue for the keyboard, comes back, then puts the process on the waiting queue of the keyboard. Then it looks into the current ready queue, takes the next process. If that next process is a user process, again it goes to the user mode and do that. Okay, by the time when the previous process, the process which was waiting for the keyboard, it gets the input, How does it get the input? Via the interrupts, because whenever you are putting something on your keyboard, the OS is getting the interrupt, and every time OS is getting the interrupt, it is going to the kernel mode again and again. It may seem a bit complex, but think it carefully, you'll be able to understand. Okay, so just for simplicity, rather than going into such level of complexity, just for simplicity, OS goes from user to kernel mode in two scenarios, on interrupt. No, in fact in three scenarios: on interrupt, on some syscall, in user mode. In fact, syscall always happen in user modes, because that is the communication between user mode and kernel mode. Or three, running some user process. Sorry, running some kernel process. That means it has detached that means it is going to context switch from the current process. The next process it sees is a kernel process. It will have to go to the kernel mode. And OS goes from kernel mode to user mode only when the task in kernel mode done and the next process is a user process. Or after booting up, when OS has created the complete environment. Okay. So whenever you are doing something on your IO device, it is going to kernel mode. Whenever some application is doing some system call, it is going to kernel mode. Or whenever it is doing a context switch and the next process turns out to be a kernel process, it will be in kernel mode. Okay. Only when it is executing some user process and there is no interrupt, the system call has been satisfied, and it is executing some user level application, only then it will be in the user mode. Is it clear?
Sir?
Bolo.
Small doubt, sir. So let us say the CPU have given an interrupt to OS. So first, let us say it takes some time from getting into user to kernel mode. So
Yes.
and between the processes in the kernel mode, between any two processes, that is some other time. Can we say anything about the time, sir, or they both are independent totally?
So you are saying that P2 is some interrupt handler, right?
Yes, sir. Exactly.
Okay. P2 is some interrupt handler, and P1 is the user process that is normally running.
Yes.
Now the corresponding P2 interrupt has occurred, and this interrupt handler has to be invoked immediately. What it
Yes.
will do that, no, CPU will not count any time here. It will first complete this P2. Okay, P1 will be switched immediately. P1 will be switched because the interrupt handlers are high priority. P1 will be switched immediately. It will go to the kernel mode. it will start P2, and as long as P2 is not finished up, it will not go anywhere.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, sir.
Now,
Okay, sir.
one thing may happen that sometimes, okay, let me just tell it. I'm not going into much details. One interrupt may invoke another interrupt. It happens. Okay. So it may happen that this P2 interrupt has invoked some P3 interrupt. Only then this interrupt handler will be context switched, because then P3 will be first serviced completely, then it will come back to P2. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
Any other query?
No, sir.
Any other query by anyone about this process management part or whatever I have discussed till now?
सर आपने कहा था कि जो कॉन्टेक्स्ट स्विचिंग या शिफ्ट जो होता है वो कर्नल मोड में होता है, तो सर यूजर मोड में कैसे शिफ्ट करता है वो?
ओके, देखो यूजर मोड में सपोज एक प्रोसेस रन कर रहा था, सपोज P1, सपोज देयर आर P1 प्रोसेस, देयर इज P2 प्रोसेस, देयर इज P3 प्रोसेस. P1 and P2 are user level process, P3 is a kernel level process, suppose. Now P1 has started its execution. Okay, what kernel will do? It will start a timer. Okay, and the timer is suppose for 100 nanosecond. As soon as the timer will be up, after the 100 nanosecond, the system will go to the kernel mode back. Okay, and will do the context switch. After doing the context switch, in the context switch, all the informations, the PCB, because in user mode you cannot access those informations of kernel. In the kernel mode, all the informations of PCB of P2 will be loaded back to the registers. That means the previous state will be restored and so on. Then after the complete environment for P2 got set up, as it is a user mode, as it is a user mode process again, it will come back to the user mode. Okay, now again it will start a timer for 100 nanosecond. After 100 nanosecond, it will come back to the kernel mode because it has to do another context switch now. It will come back to the kernel mode, do the context switch. We'll set the system in the state suitable for the P3, and it checks P3 is already a kernel mode process, so it does not go back to the user mode. It performs in the kernel mode, it executes P3, then it starts the timer for 100 nanosecond again. After 100 nanosecond, it comes back to P1, it is a user process and goes to the user mode. Is it clear? Does it answer your question?
हाँ सर, थोड़ा बहुत समझ में आया.
Okay, in fact, it will be much clear if you are in CSR IT and you are going to take the operating system course. But I'm not, in fact, I'm trying to avoid as much as possible advanced concepts of operating system here, because it will drift our discussion completely from the C programming, or that is our focus. So any other query? Any other query regarding the process management? Okay, so now I'll discuss the next concept. Though I have already discussed a huge part of this concept, so it will not take much time. That is device management. Now see, just what I have written there. Every device sends an interrupt. When operated, that means when it needs to send some signal. And OS handles that. and OS handles that. Now think about it. See, touchpad, keyboard, they are very common devices, right? So the OS writer knows there is a that these particular gestures can appear, these particular type of interrupts can appear from mouse, from touchpad, mouse, or when monitor will write something on the screen, this particular interrupt monitor can send. OS writers knows them. In fact, they are pretty well written in the corresponding documentations. Now, this is for keyboard, mouse, monitors, like these common devices. But think about the printer. There is not only one kind of printer. Printers, there are thousands of types of printer, ranging from some HP DeskJet, HP inkjet, to some brothers printers, and so on. Canons. It is not possible for OS to keep information about all of them, right? That's why the uncommon devices, like the printer, scanner, okay, maybe the that USB, what it is said, USB Wi-Fi adapter. Okay, because they have multitudes of developers. And each can send various types of interrupts. Obviously, you cannot expect the OS developer will collect all possible devices in the world and test that on and write the corresponding interrupt handler in the system, right? So that's where drivers comes in. So that's why these devices come with drivers. Okay. Drivers for these devices sit between OS and the device. Let me tell you as an example. Suppose you have some printer. You have also installed the driver of that particular printer. Now in an application, you want to print something. You have made a request to print. You have selected the corresponding printer on the corresponding print dialog and so on. Whenever, as soon as you click on print, the application will send a request to the OS, right, via system call that it wants to print. The OS, what it will do, OS itself does not handle the interrupt handler itself, because there is an unknown printer, but its driver is in the OS, its driver is installed in the OS. OS will tell the corresponding driver that this document needs to be printed. The driver will inform printer that take this document and print it. Now suppose now the printer will take the document and will try to print. Now suppose your printer is has missing pages. Printer does not have page. What it will do? It will send back a signal that page missing. Now to whom it will send back a signal? Obviously, you cannot expect OS to wait for the printer when it will be done, right? Because as soon as it sends the, as I have discussed as well, that as soon as it sends the request to the device or anything, it comes back to its own work. So again, interrupt. when the signal is coming inside the machine, remember, when some signal is coming from some device inside the machine, it will always come in the terms of interrupt. Okay. Now, if the printer is missing some page, printer will send an interrupt that user has not given any page in the printer with the corresponding interrupt ID. Obviously, the driver knows how to handle that interrupt. Driver will handle that interrupt and will tell the OS that inform the application who made that request that the printer has missing pages. OS will immediately OS will immediately tell the application that the printer is missing pages. Or similarly, when the printing has already been done, printer will send an interrupt that the printing has been done. The driver will tell the OS that inform your application, whoever has sent the request for printing, that printing has been done. OS does that. Is it clear? Whatever I said?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that's how these drivers work. So drivers, you can consider something like this. Drivers give the corresponding electronic device life. And you can consider another thing like this. OS is nothing but the collection of drivers for various hardwares. OS has already the driver for processor, the process management, the memory. OS already has the drivers for the common devices like the monitors, keyboards and mouse, the drivers for the hard disk. All the uncommon devices provide their own drivers. Okay. Now, I'll not discuss about device management more than this. That's how in fact devices communicate with the machine. That means that's how machine and device communicate with each other. Now, if we look into the hard disk internally is made up of several. It's quite difficult to draw here on this tablet. Okay. Now, the hard disk is made up of several platters. Okay, there is a read write head. This is read write head. Okay. Though this can be a common term, but the splatters. But more importantly, the hard disk is divided into several tracks. The HDD is divided into tracks, and each track in fact divided into cylinders. Let me just try to correct it. Divided into cylinders. Cylinders are divided into tracks. And tracks are divided into sectors. In fact, whether it is divided into tracks and those tracks are divided into cylinders, or it is divided into cylinders or cylinders are divided into tracks, I'll tell that with absolute surety in the next class. But at the end, It is sectors. This is the most important part. Sectors are the basic unit of storage. Okay. Now, the files are the main content. Files are the main content. Directories are just indices. Okay. That means what? Suppose you have a hard disk separated into sectors. Just one thing. Let me just write the most important information. Sectors are commonly of size 512 bytes. Okay, each sector is a 512 bytes. Now, suppose, so it is divided into small 512 bytes and so on. Now, when you store a file, that files will be stored among these sectors into groups of sectors, right? So maybe say a file, and not necessarily they are contiguous. So the file maybe the first sector of a file, say maybe at this location, maybe the next sector of the file is at this location, next sector can be somewhere else here, and so on. So say a file is spread among sectors, say sectors 34, 132, 256, and so on. It can happen. In fact, one sector of the file keeps information on which sector the next part of the file is in. So 34 will keep a track of the 132th sector. 132th sector will keep a track of the 256 sector, and so on. Because over the edges, it may happen that some sectors turn into a bad sector. That means that means bad sectors are in which sectors you cannot store information, or you cannot read or write into that sector. That sector is corrupted. So what OS does is that, but you see that repairing bad sectors. If it is a hardware problem, you cannot do anything. Those sectors are already corrupted. Right? What in fact OS does is that it takes the content of that sector and puts it into another sector. The sector which is correct, which is not corrupted, and makes the appropriate links. Okay, so that the continuity of the file remains as it is. Now, when we read a file, okay, now files are the main content. Now, why did I say that directories are just indexes? See, in Linux, the root directory is represented by a slash. Okay. Now, maybe that the information of slash is stored in sector, say, as it is a root directory, generally it stays near the starting of the disk, say in the sector, say 10. What is in that root directory? In that root directory, this is the content of the root directory. in that root directory, it has nothing but a list. Say the information of bin, whether it is a directory or file. Bin is a directory. At which sector, if it is a directory, at which sector the index of bin is in. Say it is at the say it is at say 14. Then where home is, say it is at 18, and so on, because home is under root. Similarly, there are all other informations. Now, if you go to the sector 18, then suppose I want to access that home. Okay, so go to sector 18. Right now, in the sector 18, again, what is inside home? Only these two directories are written here. So again, it is just an index. Lost was found. Maybe it is at some sector, say 132, and the user directory. Maybe it is say at 136. Okay. Now suppose you want to access the /home/user, which in this case it is my folder, it is my directory. Right. Now you'll go to the, suppose you want to access that directory, you'll go to the sector number 136. You'll see another list there. The corresponding documents, downloads, they are also directories in themselves. And there is a file as well, test.c. Now, for the directories, they are the directories. Whereas the test.c is a file. So again, there will also be a sector number, say 215. But this sector number does not point to a directory, it is a file. So if you go to the sector number 215, you will see the content of the test.c directory. Whereas suppose document is at directory say 200, at sector number 200, if you go to the sector number 200, you will see another list there, which are in the and that means the contents of the document directory, document subdirectory, and it goes on. So for directories, so every directory is nothing but an index. Okay, every directory is nothing but an index, whereas files are the main content. If you do an ls-l, you will see that every directory takes only 4096 bytes. So it is only 8 sectors. Obviously, it depends upon the number of contents there is. Whereas test.c, it is a very small file. Test.c, it resides within a single sector, only 76 bytes. But
Sir,
bolo.
Sir, if we make some updates or changes in any file, does the directory change, sir, or it remains?
No, directory will not change. If you make some change in test.c file, maybe suppose you have added something. Suppose I am opening up test.c here. Okay, if you add something after this, say, or somewhere in between, first of all, the change I did here, it is still not written to the hard disk. It is still in the RAM. Okay, as soon as I saved it, it got written to the hard disk. Now either it will spread itself, that means maybe it will be written into another sector, right, or it will be written into the same sector, but the starting sector will not change. And if the starting sector needs to be changed, that will be reflected into the corresponding directory as well. This entry in that case only, if the OS deems fit that to make the new addition or to make the new updation, the location of the file needs to be changed, only then this entry will be changed in the corresponding directory index, its parent directory index. Is it clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you can think it about this, that the files and directories in Linux stay in a tree-like fashion. So root directory, under this it's a bin directory, there is a boot directory, there is a home directory, and so on. In the home directory there are the various, the lost plus found in is in fact a part of the file system, so I'm not going into the details. The most important are the various users. If the system has 3 users, each will have separate home directories. Okay, and in that particular home directory, the user keeps everything, his own files and directories and so on. Right, now suppose there is a document directory. Okay, now whenever a user logs in, by default that user is logged in at this location. As for example, if I close it, I open up another terminal, the default location I'll see will be my home directory. Okay, and the path to a particular directory, a particular file is written starting from the top, that means starting from the root towards down. That is how paths are written. So slash, then home, separated by obviously the corresponding slash, then slash user1, and then if you want to go to the documents, this one. So if you write something like cd documents and so on, and if you do the pwd, you'll see these paths like this, because when I'm here at this moment, my current location is this. Okay, this home directory is so important for a user that there is a special shorthand for this. I hope you have already done all these things in Linux lab. That is tilde symbol. Here is a special symbol for home directory. So it does not matter wherever you are, just write cd tilde symbol. Tilde symbol is the symbol above the tab. Press enter, you will come back to the home directory. Okay. And these directories in fact are nothing but the corresponding indexes, the list of files, and the files are the main contents. Is the concept clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'll keep my discussion up to this. Okay. In the next class, I'll discuss just one brief thing, that how in fact these sectors are read and write. That will take at most 15 minutes of discussion. Then I'll go to then there I'll end the discussion of OS. Okay, but I'll discuss that next day. I'll keep that 15 minutes of discussion for the next day, because it's already I think 2:45. It has crossed 2:46. Okay, so I'll keep my discussion up to this today.
Sir,
Bolo.
but is there any book to read about all this stuff you taught?
Huh?
Is there any book to read about all this stuff you taught?
The fact is there is no introductory. In fact, truth to be told, either you will have to take a full course on operating system, for which obviously there are multitudes of great book. One including, let me write, operating system concepts by Silver Sketch, Galvin Gagne. This is the best book. This is the best introductory book, I'll say. But and from there on, there are much more advanced books. Right. Then if you want to specialize into one particular operating system like Linux or Unix, then there are special books for them as well. Okay. But even these introductory books, obviously, as you can understand, it is for a complete course for operating system. But exactly what I've discussed here, there is no book for this short, for that means this level of short operating system concepts. So if you want to learn all these things, I'll suggest that you start with this book. But if you're in CSR IT, you will already have to read this book in operating system course, I think in 6th semester. Okay.
Sir,
Bolo.
sir, when we add some external drivers for any hardware related thing, we observe some boost in performance. So, sir, why these hardware by default runs on their peak performance?
Okay. Can you give me one example of that?
Sir, like sir, GPU driver or sir, audio drivers.
Okay. Okay. As for example, let me consider about the GPU driver. When suppose you have connected your monitor to the GPU, the fact is when you have not installed the driver, right, OS is simply taking the content from the, though I am not specialist in NVIDIA drivers internal or GPU drivers internally, but this is one thing that can happen. OS does that and in their own way, in much generalized way, right? In exactly the way maybe it would access the video RAM or any integrated graphics card and so on. But as soon as you install the particular graphics card driver, that driver is meant only for that particular graphics card. So all the, that means all the interrupts, all the requests, they are made specifically for that graphics card. Okay, and rather than handling in a much more generalized way, the graphics card driver is completely in fact it's quite difficult to elaborate in this manner, that rather than handling in a much more generalized way, that graphics card then gets handled in a specialized way. So that may be a reason that you are seeing an improvement in performance. That may be a reason, but I am not pretty much experienced in video card internals. But I'll I'll look into it and let you know in details in the next class then. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Any other query? Any other query regarding what I have discussed today? Okay, so I'll keep my discussion up to this, and we'll see you on Thursday, right? Thursday.
Yes, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.